Welcome back to another episode of Kintsugi Talks Pod with your host, Soraya Brown. Before we get into this episode, I would like to introduce the sponsor for today's episode, Anchor FM by Spotify. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Kintsugi Talks. As you can see, this is another interview episode. I'm very happy that I get to do more of these on the podcast. And I have a very special guest today, which this one is like more special because I got to meet my guest through a connection through a previous guest that I had on the show. Shout out to Paul Granger. He's the one that actually connected us two. And so my special guest for today is Lauren Medina. Hi, Lauren, and thank you for being on the show today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Now, from the conversation that we had before, it was kind of a while ago, but even in the emails when we were talking to each other and you shared a bit of your story, and I was like, I definitely need to have you on the show because I think your story is just super inspiring and something that people definitely need to hear. If you would just like to give a little introduction about yourself and then just share about your story from there.
Sure. So hi, my name is Lauren. I am a teacher. I am living in the Richmond area, and that's where our mutual friend who connected, Soraya, and I lives. And I guess I felt like I wanted to connect with people over the topic of where we find God in suffering. Just because the past 3 years of my life, that's been something that I have asked myself a lot, or something that I've been grappling with, and that I feel like I have grown a lot through, and I just I feel like I have some encouragement and hope that I would want to offer to other people who are maybe going through something.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is something that as people in the faith, or even people outside the faith who probably don't have a strong relationship with God, to be able to know how to sit in suffering, whatever the suffering looks like for that person. Now, I know one thing you went through a bit of a medical crisis that actually made it for you to where it's like you could barely even walk. If you could share how that happened and just how it impacted your faith in such a way.
Yeah, definitely. So about 3 years ago, I started noticing I was very active. So I was hiking, biking, running, rock climbing, all the things. And I started noticing some pain in my left foot while I was rock climbing. So I thought, okay, well, this seems like maybe it's just a sports injury. I'll just stop rock climbing for a while. But then it started happening I also had to stop running because it would be hurting while I was running. And then it started hurting while I was biking. And then it started hurting while I was just walking. And it got worse and worse over the course of the next few months to the point that I think it started hurting probably August. And then by February, I just couldn't put weight on it. It hurt so bad. And so I started, when you have injuries, you think I'll go to the doctor and they'll tell me what to do and it'll be okay. But I started that process of going to doctors to try to figure out what was wrong, and kept getting different answers, and I guess it wasn't a typical issue. And some people were like, we think it's this problem. Some people would say, we think it's that problem. Some people would say, you're going to need surgery. Some people would say, you definitely shouldn't have surgery. And so it was very confusing. And also there was very little I could do. They gave me cortisone shots and orthotics and stuff, but other than just trying to rest it and things like that, I was just in a ton of pain every day and really couldn't get around very well. So I pushed through 1 year of that, and I go to a handful of different doctors trying to get different opinions. And things got a little bit better at times, but still not all the way better. And I started really struggling during that time with my understanding of how God answers prayer. Because up until that point, I guess I just believed that if I was going through a hard time, or like something bad was happening, that the Lord would protect me from that thing, if I just would seek him. But I was seeking him so earnestly with this situation, and felt like I was just getting like a shut door in my face. And that was very difficult, to go to this God who I believed like loved me and was like someone who wouldn't want to hurt me, who was letting me like continue to experience this pain and like wasn't healing it, even though I was like really like begging him to heal it. And so after a year of that, instead of getting better, the exact same thing happened to my right foot, and it just started getting worse and worse and worse, and I couldn't put any weight on it. And so second year, I'm like going back and forth between like one foot hurts worse one day, one foot hurts worse the other day. Thankfully, this was one of God's mercies along the way. It was COVID, so I was working from home. So I would not have been able to really like get around at my job for most of the year, but I didn't have to because I was at home. And I also had a little bit more flexibility to make it to like different doctor's appointments to try to continue to find out what was going on. And one problem would like lead to another problem. So it would start with like something, they'd be like, oh, we think this is a tendon problem. And then it would be like, now in a different part of your foot, you have like a pinched nerve. And then now in a different part of your foot, you have a stress fracture. And I guess it was because I would just like be trying to walk on different parts of my foot to try to like compensate for the pain. And I would just always end up breaking something else. And so finally, after about 2 years, I got a diagnosis that I felt like confident probably was correct, which was that I was just born with like some extra bones in my body that like were not supposed to be there, and I had to get them taken out in order to get my body to function properly. And so I ended up having double foot surgery at this like both feet at the same time. And yeah, so I guess like I'm just gonna go from there. Like what happened was, I also during that time had been in a pretty significant relationship that seemed, well, we had talked about that we wanted to get married. We had told our families this. He had already like asked my parents for their blessing. So I really was planning on this relationship to lead to marriage, and that was kind of like my plan for the next phase of my life. And that was kind of like the one good thing in the midst of all this like physical pain was that I had this like relationship that I felt like was heading somewhere. And I got to a point where I felt like the Lord and also my parents like brought some things to light that made me realize that this maybe like wasn't the right path for me to move forward in the relationship with this person. And it was the most difficult thing I've ever done is breaking up with this person, because I felt like God was telling me to do so. Although I did not want to, and like still loved the person at the time. And so I was heartbroken, and then I had to have double foot surgery and spend like the whole summer not really able to walk and live like staying with my parents because I couldn't do anything for myself. So it just really took me to a place of like really having to seek like, why is God letting this happen to me all at once? Why does it feel like I've been like crying out for him to help things get better for so long, but they just keep getting worse? Like the first year it's one foot, the next year it's both feet, and then the next year it's like a breakup and I still can't walk. And I felt like the Lord was just like letting me flounder out in the wilderness. But by the third year, still like things with my feet were kind of rocky. Like even after the surgery, my feet were like so weak from not having walked for a couple of years really, that I kept just like getting stress fractures. So I got a stress fracture on my right foot, then I got a stress fracture on my left foot. So it kind of like was still going. Thankfully now things are finally like getting better. It's about a year since I had that surgery, and I'm not like back to full strength, but like it seems like things are taking a turn for the better. But just for a long time there, I really felt like I was praying and praying for healing in a lot of ways and like wasn't receiving it. And so I read a whole lot of things about suffering and like how can we believe that like God is good if he still lets us experience suffering. And I think the perspective that helped me the most was that I realized that God can work good purposes in your suffering, and he won't let it be like meaningless. And I don't necessarily have to understand why he's allowed certain suffering into my life, but I do trust that he's still good. And maybe I will never really understand like the purpose of all of it while I'm on this earth, but I think that thinking that it's just totally random and God like doesn't care or has just like let us kind of be at the mercy of whatever happens on earth, but he's not like involved, I guess. That was like a really scary thought to me, but that was something I was like considering might be true because that's what it felt like. But through the whole process, I felt like the Lord has taught me to put my faith in him rather than in like the circumstances changing. And I just think that this is something that we need to talk about as Christians more, because I think it's great to want to encourage people to pray for healing or to pray for the circumstances to change and to have like faith to do that. But sometimes people will pray for something in faith and the Lord chooses not to answer that prayer in that time or at all in the way that they think that they may want it to be answered. And it doesn't necessarily mean that like that person's doing something wrong. It may be that is something that the Lord has chosen to allow in your life. But if you're seeking him, I believe that he won't waste it, and he can also like sustain you through it. And so I think I want to talk about this more with people because I just felt like in such a dark place when all of this was happening to me and I was seeking God and feeling like he wasn't responding or like helping me in the ways that I felt like I needed. But I've come to such a different place now where I see how his hand has like been on my life this whole time and how he really foreknew like all of the circumstances that I was going to go through and like gave me the provision to endure them. And it's not necessarily about the outcome. Like it's not necessarily about like, do my feet get healed or do I like end up finding another relationship or something like that. It's like about God, trusting in God's goodness and like letting him work even in the midst of your suffering. I also think that I want to share with people my story because I was definitely in a place for a while where I felt like everything was just getting worse and worse, and I just could not imagine things in my life getting better. Like it just seemed like it just took a bad turn, and I just like did not really want to go on living. Like it was too painful. But I'm here, a year after the surgery and the breakup, they're around the same time. And I'm happy. And I feel like my trust in the Lord has deepened, and it gives me like kind of like a more solid foundation because I know that things are going to go wrong again. And at some point, like there's going to be other hard things that happen in my life. And I guess I've just come to believe that like, that God is still good, even though he does allow suffering in our lives. And that his goodness will like win over all of the hard things that we go through.
That is so good. And one thing that you said that stuck out to me is that like God will sometimes like approve of something to happen. It's very, very much like the story of Job, where God gave the enemy permission to do certain things to Job, but just to not kill him. Like whatever you do not take his life away, but you can allow these afflictions to happen to his life. And I think it could be so easy to forget that God is God at the end of the day, and that God doesn't have to heal us right away or heal us at all. God doesn't have to bless us right away or bless us at all. And I think it is very much needed for us to sometimes go through stuff like that, because I believe it strengthens our dependence on Him in however long that season, that valley moment, I'll call it, lasts. And for you went through two different types of I would say like traumatic events. You went through a physical one, and then you went through an emotional romantic one. And so going through those things, I know there's so many people that will listen to this that can relate. And for me as well, I had cancer 3 different times. And the first time I was like, okay, like this probably won't happen again. And then it came back the second time. And then I was like, okay, well, if God healed me the first time, He can heal me the second time. Then when the third time came around, I was like, all right, you're doing too much. Like this, at this point,
yeah, I was like, what is going on?
I was mad at God. I was very angry at God. And at that point, I had lost a lot of faith, and I had just like wanted to give up. And it took the people around me to kind of have like faith for me. And He did heal me from it the third time. But then I also like now, like in my life, I think about it and I realized that He didn't have to heal me from that, but He did. But He also like made me go through it 3 different times. And why He made me go through it 3 different times, I'm not sure. I actually never really took the time to ask Him that. And then if I do ask Him that, He may never answer that question, because He doesn't have to answer all my questions. But something that I want to get into is how a lot of Christians in the faith today, I believe there is a lot, or maybe sometimes too much of a talk about like hope versus faith in a way, because I believe they're kind of 2 different things. They're similar to each other, but then they're 2 different things. Because hope, how I see it, is more of an emotion, and then faith is an action. Like you, like, because even in the Bible it says like faith without works is dead. Like you can have faith in something emotionally and mentally, but then you can also have faith in something by putting action towards it. So I wonder, what do you think about the whole like hope versus faith thing? And if sometimes we could put more energy into one thing versus the other, and if that could lead to potential problems?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to answer this like the way that it's coming to mind, but if it's not like kind of what you were needing to ask, then just let me know. But I think that like in the church today, people are kind of like on the hope side of things. They're like very heavy on wanting you to like believe that God can heal you, believe that God can like fix your difficult circumstances. And I think to an extent that's good, but to me, faith is what it looks like when you don't know that He is going to fix your circumstances, or maybe you've experienced something that's like so broken you can't get it back, like someone dying when you did not expect them to. But faith is like choosing to still put your trust in God. Or like when I think about you describing faith as an action, I kind of think of this image of like a bridge. Like if you are walking on a bridge, you're showing you have faith that it will hold you up. And it's a different thing to be on like the sidelines saying that you have faith that it will hold you up, and it's another thing to like actually put your feet on it and walk across with like a chasm below you. And so I think that part of sitting and suffering well is putting yourself on the bridge, and underneath is like a lot of scary stuff, but you're like trusting the Lord to hold you even within that scary stuff. That's not to say that hope is bad either. I definitely think that we need to have hope in the Lord. But I think that our hope needs to be in the person of Christ and not necessarily in certain outcome that we would like to see. Even if it is a good outcome or something that we know is like in line with the will of God, like someone being cured from cancer, for example. Even though that is a really good thing to hope for, like our ultimate hope needs to be like in the person of Jesus, because that's like the only thing that we know will not fail us.
Absolutely. And you answered it in such in a better way that I probably could have. And something that you said that stuck out to me of the example of the bridge, that is like you can look at a bridge from a distance and be like, oh, that bridge looks sturdy, it looks like it could hold something up, but you actually walking across and being like, okay, this bridge can hold me up, even with all like whatever scary stuff. There could be a water filled with sharks under it, yet you still choose to cross the bridge. And in having hope in the person of Jesus, I think that is so important, because we definitely can get caught up in the physical things that are around us, in the problems that we see. And I forget where this was in the Bible. I want to say this was with the prophet Elijah, where the servant, like there was like an army of people like coming towards like where they were, and then the servant was telling Elijah that it's like, oh, there's like a huge army of people coming towards us, what we're supposed to do. And then Elijah, him being a prophet, he sees that there's like a whole army of God like already there, and it outnumbers the enemy that is like coming towards him. But the servant couldn't see it because the servant was seeing in the natural and not the supernatural. But then when he had asked God to like open the boy's eyes, he was able to see the Lord's army was greater than the enemy's army. And so I think it's so important for something that we pray for. Like this is even something that I pray for still every day, is for God to have my eyes open to the things that he wants me to see, because having faith in God is having faith in things that haven't even happened yet, that you don't see yourself seeing for like probably years and years and years from now. And it's definitely easier said than done, but taking that action every day of choosing to believe in it, that is what will help like strengthen our faith in God, even in our knowing of God and in our relationship with God.
Yes. I think that like one of the things, I guess it's almost like a secret of how to, not that like you can totally make suffering feel fine. It's not like, it's still suffering. But it to me was like a key to surviving in a time of suffering, was to put my faith in Jesus, in like the person of Jesus, because it was like I felt like circumstantially everything was going wrong. And so if I'm putting my faith in like the circumstances, I was just like bitterly disappointed constantly, like every single day, because I wanted to be healed and I wasn't healed. But when I put my faith in God, like it opened, like you said, praying to open up your eyes. It opened up my eyes to like the ways that he was at work in my life in that moment, in that day, even with my pain. And that was a good thing. That wasn't a disappointment. That was something that gave me hope that God hadn't abandoned me, because I could see all these ways that like he was still speaking to me, and he was still working in my life and in the lives of the people around me, and that there were also like ways he could still use me to serve others and to like be part of his work on the earth, even though I was in pain and felt like weak. And so that was like when I would be in so much pain, I would wake up every morning, and I would like come and sit on my couch with my journal and pray, and I would just ask that like the Lord would make his presence known to me in that day. And like you say, like show me what he wants me to see in that day. And even though for reasons I cannot probably say that I totally understand, he continued to let me go on for like these years without being able to walk and being in a lot of physical pain. I could see him at work in my life when I was seeking that. And so instead of being like always so disappointed that the things that I wanted to change were not changing, I was finding myself feeling like hopeful and inspired and excited about like what the Lord was still doing in my life in spite of all of that.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we have to hold on to at the end of the day. Now, I wonder what is something you would say to people who would probably listening to this conversation, who feel like they have nothing to bring, or they feel like their story isn't like there's not like shocking events in their story. If their story is just like, oh, I grew up in church, gave my life to Christ at this age, I was raised in ministry, like if their story is like that, like it's not filled with pain or suffering and things like that, people who feel like they can't do enough to bring glory to God, like with their story, what is something you would say to people like that?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that I, throughout all of the things that I've been through, have like really come to have a deeper belief in like the sovereignty of God. And so whatever circumstances you've been through or are experiencing, like, it's not to say that the Lord has like caused you to experience the pain that you've experienced, but basically he knows, he's always known like what you've been through, and he's been there when you were going through it, and he knows what's ahead of you as well. And so if you feel like your life is just kind of like going relatively smoothly and you're not really sure like how the Lord like wants to use you, I think it's important to remember that like the Lord is sovereign over your life, and he has plans for everybody's life. So even if you feel like things are very like hunky-dory, kind of like so average, like I would encourage people to just take the time to ask God every day, what does he want you to see in that day? What does he want you to do in that day? And to guide you to be like the person that he wants you to be. And I think when we ask for God to reveal himself to us, he really, I think, is frequently inclined to respond. It's not always in the ways that we expect. It's not always in the ways that we want. But I think whenever I have asked for the Lord to just show me himself without giving him parameters, like I want you to show yourself to me by like healing me from this thing, or I want you to show yourself to me by like giving me money, or whatever like it is people could ask, but just asking him to show himself in your day, then it kind of makes you aware, like it makes you reminded to look for him. And I think that you will like find that he's there. And also if you pray about it too, I think that it makes you more aware of opportunities where the Lord could use you, or like ways that you could connect with others, because it's like on the forefront of your mind, but by the fact that you took the time to ask God for that. So I don't think you have to like go through some kind of crazy story like having cancer or not being able to walk to be used by God. I think that God has reasons that we may not always understand why he has led some people down some paths and some people down other paths. Some people's stories seem to include more suffering than others, or different types of suffering. But like, rest assured, your life is in like the hands of God. And so if you're seeking him and wanting to follow him, he'll show you what you need to do and what his dream is for you as a person. So it's not so much that like you have to like go through some crazy thing or experience something. Like, maybe it could be more about like the small ways that you see God and seek God in your daily life. And some of that's a discipline, and trying to spend the time to remember to talk to God, to read the Bible, to spend time with other Christians. But yeah, I wouldn't want anybody to think like, oh, God like can only like work in people who have like these crazy stories, because he can work in anyone's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said it so beautifully. And to actually kind of connect to that, for people who have gone through like kind of like the opposite, that their life wasn't so like honky-dory, so calm. It was filled with a lot of trauma. It was filled with a lot of pain, a lot of grief and loss. And then they see the people whose lives is just kind of like very calm in a way, very like kind of quote unquote plain. And I did experience this at one time. I experienced jealousy towards those people. I experienced envy towards those people. And it was in a point in my life where just like a lot of questioning of like, God, why would you do this to me? Instead of asking God, like, what was the plan for, like, what was like the plan or purpose behind this happening to me? So my question for you is, why is it important to ask what is the purpose of this, instead of asking God, why did you allow this to happen, or why did you do this to me?
Yes, I think that's a really important distinction, because asking why he let you experience difficult things, and some people maybe, like, for example, maybe some traumatic things happened to you in your childhood, but somebody else had like a perfectly normal childhood, or maybe like you had some kind of like illness and somebody else like never had that illness, or you have always struggled with relationships and other people just like meet someone and get married and it's all like seems so easy for them. I think it is really easy to be jealous and to wonder why, but God doesn't really like owe us an explanation. I think that asking about what the purposes might be is more productive than dwelling on the reasons why God allowed to happen, because chances are you're probably not going to get an explanation that will like totally make you feel better about the trauma that you've been through, or the pain that you've been through. Like, it's not like God's going to say, oh, it was because of this. And you're like, oh, well, it's fine that I had this horrible thing happen to me when I was a kid. Or, oh, it's fine that I experienced this disease. Like, I don't think that, like, with the way that our human perspective is, God could give us like just one pat answer that would like satisfy us. But asking for the purpose in it is something that focuses more on like the present and the future than dwelling on what has happened in the past. We don't know why God allowed you to go through that thing or has allowed certain circumstances to happen to you. But we do know that he is good and that he does have plans for our lives. And so I think it would be important to ask him, God, like, can you please show me how you can use what I've been through? Show me where I can find purpose in this. Bring something good out of where I've been, even if the places have been dark places. And that is something that I really think that he can and will do.
Because I look at a lot of different people in the Bible who have been through a lot of like, because I think, well, in conversations that I've had recently with people, that they're either like kind of like just coming into Christ and everything, that they thought the Bible was just like a story filled with like how people got blessed and everything. And then when they get into it, they're like, oh no, a lot of crazy stuff happens in the Bible. And I'm like, yeah, like you should read the book of Judges one day and you'll see. But yeah, and then the one person that comes to mind is David. And you see in one part of the Bible, in like First Kings, Second Kings, of his kind of just like him coming into the calling that was put upon him at a very young age when he was still a shepherd boy. And then the turn of events that he faced Goliath and killed him. King Saul got very jealous of him because they were praising him. They were praising David more than they were praising him. David befriending Jonathan, and then David pretty much being on the run for his life from King Saul. And there was multiple times that he could have killed Saul, but he didn't, because he had respect for Saul in that way. Then he finally became king. Then his own son tried to take the throne from him, tried to kill him. He lost a son that he had with Bathsheba, but then God blessed him with another son who is Solomon. And just even more things that happen in his story. But then we see all of that, all of like the more emotional turmoil side of it in the book of Psalm. Like he literally wrote everything down that he went through in these different little prayers and these different little songs. And I believe it is a crucial thing that the Bible has that it has like his story in one part, and then it has like just this real raw like emotion, like there's a lot of lament in Psalm. Like it could be like there's one, like Psalm 23 is a psalm that he's like saying over himself about like just trying to maintaining his confidence, like the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He make me lie down in the green pastures. He lead me beside still water. He restoreth my soul. And then we have other psalms where it's like, why have you forsaken me? I am here in this dark place. I'm about to be devoured by my enemies. And the vulnerability that is shown in it, I think, is so important for everyone to realize, especially Christians, that we need to have those type of moments where we're raw, where we're honest with God. And I feel like when we start having more of those moments, I mean, like God already knows that, like he knows our heart, he knows our mind, but then actually verbally expressing it is so important to God, because God wants to be there with us in our suffering. Like God isn't just sitting on his throne like watching our suffering, like if he's watching a movie eating popcorn. God isn't like that. He's not like that at all, because when we're in pain, he's in pain. He doesn't like seeing his children in pain. So one thing that I want to ask you is for people who feel like they don't know what to say to God in the midst of their suffering. Like, what are some things that they could do to like help them express what they're feeling, like to God or even in other outlets?
That's a really good question. Well, I love that you brought up the Psalms, because I feel like the Psalms were like one of the, I mean, when I was in like my darkest places, I would just like read the Psalms every day, and it helped me so much, because there are some Psalms that are like so dark, like it's like the tone is like really despairing, and yet like this is in the Bible, and so it kind of like but they overall are hopeful. And so it kind of just like gave me this feeling of like, it is okay for me to feel dark, right? It's okay for me to feel like I'm grieving, and it's okay for me to feel like I'm despairing. It doesn't mean that like actually God has abandoned me. It doesn't mean that actually God is not good, because even in the Bible, David is like having these like Psalms of lament, and yet he's like still praising the Lord in these other Psalms. Or like sometimes it's in one Psalm, like the beginning starts with a lament and then it ends with like a praise. So I think reading Psalms can be like a really good, I just did a lot of reading Psalms and like underlining the parts that I identified with. I even like I had a period of time where like I would read a Psalm and then I would like write a poem based on the Psalm, and none of them were very good, but it was like very like cathartic. And I think sometimes writing out your prayers can be helpful, like journaling, like you're writing a letter to God. So like I would like journal, like, you know, God, I really like need you to show up today. I'm in a lot of pain. And I would like get specific with him. I'd be like, why is my left foot hurting again? And I'm distressed. Like, you know, I thought this was over with. And God like can handle that level of detail of your feelings. And it's also like letting him into everything that you're going through. And like you said, he does already know, but there's something special about like offering that to him. I think that it depends probably on your personality. Like for me, I'm very creative. So when I was going through a hard time, I really did a lot of journaling, writing poetry, art. I like painted. I wrote songs. That's not everybody's jam, but it could be like something, you know, like talking to your friend, like talking to a friend about it, praying with someone, or having someone pray for you. Like if you feel like you don't have the words, you don't have the energy to pray for yourself, like asking a friend or someone from church to like pray for you, pray with you, that can make a big difference. Or even like going out in nature and like being in the Lord's presence in that way. I think there's different ways that people can kind of connect with how they're feeling about what they're going through, and different ways for them to connect with the Lord. Like even there's been times where like I've been feeling distressed and I go outside to like a beautiful place and I feel like the sun shining on me just like reminds me that God is still good, even though it's like it's not like audible. It's not like the sun is like telling me anything like scripture or something, but like just the feeling of the sun on my face, I'm like, wow, the same God who is like allowing this suffering in my life is like the same God who created this sunlight on my face. And so I know that he's like, it just reminds me that he's good, and that like even though I'm going through something really hard, I can still trust in his goodness. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that someone could express themselves, but I think the most important thing is that you do try to express yourself in some way and take the time to grieve and lament, and not to feel like it's unholy or sinful to do so, because I think we have examples in scripture of the ways that people lament and bring their troubles before the Lord. And I think that is something that even we see Jesus doing when he's like in the Garden of Gethsemane, like asking God, can you like take this cup away? Like he's bringing before the Lord like how he is feeling and all of his like fears. And so I think that we don't have to be afraid that like we're not good enough Christians or something if we feel angry or upset at God. I think that to be able to work through that, we need to like move towards God rather than away from him.
Yeah, that last part is good, because there can be like a bit of fear that might set in There's this post that I've seen go around like social media that like the first part of it says that is like, oh, I'm in trouble, my dad's gonna kill me. And then the other part is kind of like the Christian like side of it that is like, oh, I'm in trouble, I need to go to my dad. That is like the first response is like, oh, it's like just having this fear, thinking it's like, oh, like I messed up, he's gonna be mad at me, he's not gonna want to help me. But then the second one was like of knowing of how loving and merciful God is, that is like, if I turn to him like in my time of trouble, I know that he'll want to help me, because that's the type of the God that we serve. And having that hope in the midst of whatever we go through and however we express our feelings, emotions, our thoughts to God, like God will be able to understand it. And I feel like it's a beautiful thing that he created us all so differently, because like you could choose to do it through, like an example you said was painting. I like to do like journals, but like do the voice recording in my phone. And then sometimes I like to write songs about it. Another person may like going on hikes and just sitting in nature by themselves. And I think the beauty of like the individual relationship with God is what really helps with that. Now, something that I want to get into, because on my podcast a lot, I'm pretty sure you're kind of familiar with it already, I talk a lot about mental health struggles on my podcast, and even my own personal mental health struggles. And one thing that I've said before is that people shouldn't feel shamed to seek help, especially if they're Christian, because there is still the stigma that is like, oh, like you don't have faith in God because you're going to see a doctor, you're going to see like a therapist and stuff like that. But then I would say something like, oh, but if someone had a headache, if someone had a foot injury, like you had a very severe foot injury, you would tell them to go see the doctor. But because it's something that you can see, it's a physical thing. But because you can't see my affliction that I deal with in my mind daily, you're gonna assume that it's some uber spiritual demonic type issue, which is not the case. Now, that's not to take away from the fact that there can be spiritual things that could lead to someone's mental health, but that is not always the case. To the people who still have that mindset or point of view, what would you say to them in regards to like the notion that people have a lack of faith when they go out to seek medical help?
Yeah, this is like a really important thing to me, because I definitely had some people in my life when I was feeling very depressed tell me things like, you're not or like anxious, like you're not trusting in God, and like you need to make sure that you're just praying and trusting in God, or you need to like pull yourself together. And I'm kind of like, if I could, I would. Like no, I don't think most people want to be depressed or anxious, or to be afflicted with other types of mental illness. Like, I wanted to be happy and to be feel normal, but you know, of course I was praying about it, but I just felt like I couldn't do it. And I think that like, all this stuff was happening to me, but I think it definitely was a result of the circumstances, but I probably like just in general, my life have certain like chemical things in my brain that are predisposed to depression and anxiety. And this just kind of kicked it into like high gear. And I just couldn't pull myself out of it. I know for myself, I definitely went into a period of depression where like I just didn't feel like enjoyment out of anything in life. It felt like to me that living was like a chore. Like I was like, okay, like God, like put me here on this earth, so like I have to be here, I have to like try to make the best of it, but like that's really all I'm doing is like just trying to survive like every day and just like make it to the next day. And I was it was not a great way to live. And so I did seek therapy for sure. And I had done that before, but this was like the first time in my life that I got on medication, and it helped me so much. And I prayed about it, and I felt like this was something that the Lord was like leading me into seeing a therapist and like getting like medication and help, because I don't think that like the Lord wanted that for me to be staying in that place of depression. And sometimes it is just, you have to think about it the same way that you think about like a physical injury. Like you wouldn't just like be walking around with like a broken arm and just be like, I just have to like trust in the Lord, and it'll get better. Or like although people do say that, like or like I just have to like think positively about it and it will be better. Like you might need to put it in a cast because it's the broken bone. And we are so lucky to live in a time where like science is developed enough to the point that like we have so much good research on like what can help with mental health problems, whether that's just like therapy wise or whether that includes medication or other types of treatments. And it's like a blessing to have the opportunity to be able to access those things. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if anyone is feeling like they're having mental health struggles, they absolutely should not let any kind of stigma like stand in their way, or they should not let anyone make them feel like they're not trusting God by like seeking mental health resources. The Lord has given us all kinds of resources. He's given us water to help with our thirst, and he's given us food to help with our hunger. He's given us people who know how to build houses to give us shelter, and he's given people the skills to be doctors so they can help us when we get sick, and he's given people the skills to be mental health professionals so they can help us when we're struggling with our mental health. And so I think that yes, I would just encourage people to know that like they're not any weaker as a Christian or like in their faith for seeking mental health resources, and actually like it could help them to be living a more vibrant, like better life if they are able to get the help that they need. Mm-hmm. And I think to the people who will maybe be inclined to tell people to just like trust God or like just think more positively, I think I would encourage those people to try to have a sense of empathy, maybe to try to imagine that it's like a physical ailment, because maybe that's something they're more familiar with. I would imagine that the type of person who might say something like that would be someone who perhaps hasn't struggled with mental health themselves personally. And I think it's really important to have a posture of listening when you are hearing the experience of someone else, whether that's like them talking about a physical ailment, whether that's them talking about mental health struggles or just like traumatic experiences that they've been through. It's like good advice for everyone, just like posture of listening and like believing the person is experiencing what they say they're experiencing. And I feel like we should all just be like encouraging each other to yes, of course seek the Lord, yes, of course trust in the Lord, but also to access the resources that he's given us to help with our health problems, including mental health.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And something you had brought up is like with the listening, something that I'm practicing myself is like being like an active listener, because I feel like me being Christian, and probably other Christians can probably relate to this, is that we are so quick to want to give like a a response of like a prayer or of like of hope or like even like a Bible scripture to like anything that anyone says. And there's times where it's like people don't need to hear that, or people don't want to hear that. People just may want an ear to listen. And I find that even when it comes to like waiting on a response from the Lord, like I find that active listening is something that I have to use when it comes to like to talking to God too, because there could be times where I'm so caught up in like my own thoughts or of like, or even thoughts of like what I would want God to say, and instead of me focusing on what God is like actually trying to tell me in the moment. Would you agree that active listening should be an important part of a Christian's prayer life as well, especially if they're in a season of suffering?
I mean, I love that idea, and I feel like now I want to try it, because my understanding of active listening is that like you, as you are talking to the person, you are kind of like restating what they've said, or like asking for clarification. Like maybe they're saying, oh, I experienced like this type of pain or something, and it's like making it really hard for me to like want to get up in the morning or something. And so you would like say back to them like, so are you saying that it's really hard for you to get up in the morning because of the pain you're experiencing? Like you're kind of like clarifying that you really understood like what they meant to say. And then it also gives them an opportunity to clarify if you like misinterpreted what they meant. So I think the idea of doing that with God is a really good one, because I think that it can definitely be tempting to, you're like being in your quiet time, you're seeking the Lord, what he wants to tell you, and maybe you feel like he's starting to tell you something, but then you like get distracted, or you start I think sometimes for me, like when I'm going through a hard time, I can start out praying and then I accidentally end up planning. Like I'm like praying for God to help me to feel better, but then I end up just journaling like a list of like 10 things I'm gonna do to like try to make my foot heal this week. And I'm like, I'm gonna ice it, I'm gonna go to physical therapy. And I'm like, maybe God was trying to tell me something and I didn't take the time to listen. So I think like asking the Lord, like if you feel like he's telling you like, maybe you read a scripture and you feel like what's sticking out to you from the scripture is like trusting in the Lord or something. And so you're like, God, are you trying to tell me that like I need to trust you more? And that can be helpful to clarify like, yes, like this is what he's saying, or like, no, you've kind of like missed the mark or something. So I think that's a really interesting idea that now I want to try, because I haven't done as much of that when I have been praying, but I think that could be really helpful, especially when you're like trying to hear from the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because this is something that I just started doing like more so recently when it comes to prayer, but I've been more so doing it when it comes to just interacting with people, because I want to be like a better friend, a better communicator. And I found that with active listening, it's been helping me to do that more, to be more understanding. And so then I tried doing it with like prayer, and I was like, oh, okay, this is something I should have done a long time ago, because it's actually very helpful. And I do encourage the listeners who are listening in on this to try doing that, to try implementing that as well, because it's definitely been beneficial for me. Actually, one thing that I want to ask about is community, because I'm pretty sure with everything that you went through, it's been a year since your surgery and a year since your breakup. I'm pretty sure you had a community of people around you who were very helpful to you in that time. Like there may have been times where your faith was low, your hope was low, and they were able to kind of like carry you up in that time. I don't want to ask how important community is, but how to find your community, because I feel like, well, obviously like the importance of community is important. Even the Bible talks about it, of surrounding yourself with people who are like-minded, who share the same faith as you, is very important. Reaching out to like elders or just someone to talk to. But I think finding the type of people who are right for you, I feel like it's hard for a lot of people nowadays, especially since we're living in a pandemic. In the first year of it, everyone was in solitude. Everyone was by themselves. So yeah, my question to you is how to find the right people to be in your community.
This is always something that's like a little tricky for me to answer, because it does, like, I'm sure, depend on your personality. And I tend to have a personality that's like very social and like not afraid to like reach out to new people. And I know that's not everybody, but I guess my experience would be to say, definitely connect with a church if you can, and try to get involved with like a small group of Christians, like a community group or something like that. Because if you are just like going to a church service and then leaving, your chances of like having like a closer connection with someone is not as high. I also think trying to find times that you can have one-on-ones with people is really important, because I think that is where we end up feeling like more comfortable to be vulnerable and like share more of our stories. So if you like to tier it, put it in tiers, like the top tier of like going to church would be like, I don't know, maybe I'm reversing it. Maybe that's the bottom tier, but there's one tier that's like, you're going to church and there's like a million people there. And so you're probably not going to have as deep of conversations. If you move it to the tier that has like a small group, I guess church would be the bottom because it's the most people, if it's like a pyramid. The middle would be like the small group. I feel like your chances of connecting with people and having more deep conversation are higher. And I feel like they're even higher at the top of the pyramid when you do a one-on-one with someone. And so I think like ways to be able to have a one-on-one with someone is like you get to know people through the connections you already have, which would be really helpful if it was through a church or a small group. And just like ask someone if they'll have coffee with you. And I feel like most of the time, like people will say yes. Also, sometimes you have a good sense of like you're having a conversation with someone about maybe something that you're going through, and they're like, oh, I like have been through something like this too, or it just seems like they're really tracking with you. Like I had there was a young woman who was like newer to my small group, and she hadn't really heard my whole story, but I think I had asked for prayer for like chronic pain or something that week. And so she reached out and texted me and was like, hey, just like want to check on you. Like I've also struggled with chronic pain. Like my mom also struggles with chronic pain. And so we ended up like having coffee on my porch and like having a really good conversation, just because she took the initiative to like reach out to me. So I think as the person who is going through something, I feel like sometimes it's hard for you to have the energy or like the motivation to reach out to other people, but I would be like encouraging you to try, because I think that it can be so helpful. I would also say ball's not all in your court. Pray about it, because when I moved into this apartment that I'm in right now about a year ago, and I was and knew I had a major surgery coming up, and I was like in a really bad emotional place, and I just prayed like, God, please just give me a friend in this apartment building. And I ended up having like this really beautiful friendship with the woman who lives upstairs from me. And there's also been times like at school where I work, like I've been like, Lord, please like give me like a friend, or give me some friends like at school. And I feel like it's another thing where it's like I ask and he is answering, but also the process of asking is making me more proactive about looking for the people who could be potential friends or connections. And so it like increases the chances of those types of relationships happening. So yeah, I guess like in terms of like how to find community, like going with like some kind of organization like a church, or for people, I guess if people didn't go to church, like even like a community organization that you're involved in, or like I work at a school, and so I feel like I have a lot of things in common with other teachers, because they're also people who are like caring and care about kids. And so We had that in common. So whatever your sphere is, like narrowing it down from the big group to like smaller group, and then trying to like get to know people one-on-one. I think those are ways to like tighten your community, because people know you better and you feel like more comfortable sharing with them.
And I like the way that you like broke it down in like the pyramid, kind of like the large group setting, like medium-sized group setting, and then like the one-on-one. I would have never thought of it that way. Also, something else that's like, because I actually became friends with a few people during the pandemic over like Facebook groups. So that's another thing that I would add on to, like, if you look on Facebook, you can like search up like groups, like there's groups about everything. Like you can find a group about people.
Oh, yeah, I joined like a broken foot people like support group online, like that existed, because there was like this whole there was like some woman who like had these crazy foot problems, and then she like was a fitness guru, so she made all these like workouts, but then she also made all these like mental health resources and stuff, because it's like such a specific but difficult challenge to like not be able to walk and to be in like chronic pain. And so there were these people, and like some of them like you know, actually ended up being like people who lived in Virginia, but then there were people from like all over the country who were like going through similar things, and we could like share stories and like bounce things off of each other. So yeah, like finding some connections online could be really helpful, especially if there's like a specific type of thing you're going through. Like you're like, I need to connect with other people who have been through divorce, or I need to connect with people who've been through cancer. Like there might not be a lot of people in your like immediate, you might not know a ton of people who have that same experience as you in your like day to day, but there are other ways to connect with people who have had similar experiences.
Absolutely, because it can be very easy, almost natural, to deal with the feeling of just being alone and lonely. And then there's times where even like I struggle with isolating myself, and then I had to know the difference between isolating myself and then allowing myself to have times of solitude, because I didn't know that there was a difference between solitude and isolation. Because like isolation, you're literally just forcing yourself to be alone. Solitude is like you're giving yourself like moments of like quiet time, moments to like recollect yourself. It is like you're alone, but you're doing something in that time to like help you like to recharge, to help you like to relax. And so that it took like quite a few of my friends to help me with that. That was like they had to help me of how to be alone in a positive way, because I'm very much an introvert. My social battery runs out very quickly depending on who I'm around. If I'm not comfortable around you, then my battery runs out very quickly. But if I am comfortable around you, then my battery stays at a good level for like a certain amount of time. And I feel like those are also important things for people to figure out about themselves too, when it comes to like trying to find the community of people that they would want to be around, because obviously everyone is different, but God is able to accommodate for those differences in many different ways. And God be funny sometimes with how he with how he works things out. Like I have a very dear friend of mine that I've only known her since 2018, and she became my friend through me being homeless. And my goal was not to make friends.
Yeah, that was probably not the forefront of your mind at that time.
Yeah. And me in that season, I was homeless for 2 years, from 2016 to 2018. So at that point in my life, I was not looking for friends. I just wanted to get out of there. But then she came into my life, and we're still very close till this day. Like she's literally family to me, and we surprisingly had a lot of the same struggles too, which is crazy. And but yeah, that her becoming a part of my community has been so beneficial, because she reminds me of like everything that I've been through, and she reminds me of like the person I am, and it connects to my identity in Christ, which I think is so important. And she's not even Christian, by the way. This friend that I'm referencing to is not Christian, but the fact that everything that she speaks over me is like affirmation and confirmation to everything God says about me is very important. Because I believe that the words you speak over somebody are just as powerful as the actions that you do towards them. And and when it comes to people being in times of suffering, the actions and the words that they speak towards themselves can greatly affect them. Was there ever a point in your time of struggle where you found yourself like having like negative self-talk or negative actions towards yourself, and then you had to teach yourself to not do that anymore?
Yes, I mean, I think that I definitely got into a mindset of like my life is just bad, or like nothing good will like ever happen to me again. Now like all this bad stuff has happened, or like my life took this like unexpected turn for the worse that I didn't anticipate. And so I think I just would think a lot of negative things about my life and where it was going, and that it was like pointless. And I guess I felt like it's so hard for me to even imagine this now, because I'm so not in that place anymore. But I remember thinking like, it doesn't matter if I'm here like on this earth, because like no, what am I even doing? Like, I don't have a significant other, like I don't have a family, like what does it even matter that I'm here? And I think that honestly for me, I need mental health like resources were like very much necessary for me to like learn tools for combating those kinds of thoughts. But I also think that like it can be really helpful to have community to help you with that. I also think like if you do have friends who are Christian, like getting people to pray with you in person can be really valuable. Like sometimes that can be more helpful than just like the person saying that they will pray for you, is like someone actually praying for you, like with you. That was like one of the things that I had some people from the church like do with me regularly, that really helped me a lot, because it helped me feel less alone. Like I wasn't the only one like going to God asking for him to help me. It was like I had these other people who were like supporting me and seeking the Lord through this. So yes, I definitely felt like there were some struggles with feeling like really negative about my life in this time. And the things that helped me the most were having people pray with me, and then also just like seeking the mental health like resources that I needed at the time.
To the people who are listening to this, what is like the greatest piece of advice you could give to anyone who is currently in a state of just like sitting in suffering?
That I think the advice that I would want to give is one, to ask for God's purpose, for God to show you like where there could be purpose in your suffering, because I feel like that sense of meaninglessness makes your suffering like worse. So asking for God for a sense of purpose in your suffering, and two, believing that even if your circumstances don't change, that things could get better. Like, I mean, if you're feeling like I guess like if something really bad has happened, sometimes you feel like you will never emotionally feel good again. And that's probably not true. I felt that way. And like a year later, I'm happy again. And like, I don't know, I really didn't believe, I really was doubtful that I would like, I just felt like in front of me, I just saw like black, like abyss, you know? Just like I could not see a good future for myself. I could only see like, you know, nothingness or like just more sadness. I couldn't imagine like a future where I was happy again. And I think that I would encourage people, if they feel like that, to not believe that, because it's not true. I also think that there are some circumstances that that may not get better. Like if you're sick, I can't promise that you'll be made well. But I do think that we have this hope in the Lord that He is not leaving the earth in this like broken state, and that there is a plan to restore everything back to like what the way that it should be, which would be like without this pain and suffering, and like in perfect relationship with God. So even if you are like going through a chronic illness or disease, and you're not sure if the Lord is like going to heal you in this lifetime, there is this level of hope in the fact that you in eternity will not have this affliction anymore. Like when I was feeling really like upset that I was in so much pain and like couldn't walk very well, I was like, I don't know if I'll like get this ability back like in this lifetime, or this will be something like I struggle with for many years, but I know that like one day I will like be able to have my full health restored and like run around again. And so just hold on to the fact that like God can like bring healing in this lifetime, and I think that He will bring healing into your life if you seek it in some way. It might be like an inner healing. It may not necessarily be like the circumstances changing or a physical healing, although it could be. But I think that He can bring healing and peace into your life. But also for all of the things that are so broken that you can't really, like they may not be fully fixed in this lifetime, hold on to that belief that God is going to ultimately fix it in eternity. And so all the things that we feel like are lost forever are like not really lost. It's like the resurrection. Like Jesus is dead, he's in a tomb, and in the days in between the crucifixion and the resurrection, it just seems like that's it. The disciples don't know that he's going to be resurrected. And so just as there's like this waiting period in between the crucifixion and the resurrection, I think that we're kind of like in a waiting period, waiting for God's kingdom to like fully take over, so that there isn't any sin and evil in the world anymore, and there will not be like suffering anymore. So we can have hope that it's not going to last one way or another, and that goodness wins in the end.
I love that so much. Now, to end off the episode, I wanted to ask you if you're okay with saying a prayer to those that are listening, whether they're sitting in a season of suffering, of some type of confusion, just a prayer for everyone that is listening.
Yeah, I would love to do that. God, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with Soraya for this podcast tonight. And I just pray that you would use this conversation in whatever ways you want to use it, Lord. I specifically just pray that maybe someone who is going through suffering would be listening to this, that you would guide someone who needs to be listening to this particular episode to listen to it, and to realize that you are there with them in their suffering, to realize that it's not meaningless and that there can be purpose in all of the things that they're going through. Lord, I pray that you will give that person or the people who may need that you will give them hope, that you will help them to see that they are beloved children of God and that you have not abandoned them and that you have your hand on their lives. You've been there through all of the tears that have been cried, and you're with them now, and you know what's coming, and you're going to be there too. So I just pray that you would bless every listener of this podcast with your peace tonight, or whenever they listen to it, and that you would help them to have a deeper understanding of your goodness and your trustworthiness and your faithfulness, God. I just pray that anyone who's listening to this who finds himself in a dark place will maybe see a shred of light and follow it and to find you there, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for that. Now, where can people find you? Where can people connect with you to possibly hear more of your story? Where can people find you at?
Oh man, that's a good question. So I'm just like an average person, not necessarily a public figure or anything, but if you want to follow me, if you want to be my Facebook friend, I actually post a lot of things about suffering on my Facebook page. So just look up my name, Lauren Medina, and maybe message me and be like, I want to hear about suffering stuff, so I don't just think you're a stranger.
Tell them that I sent you. If you decide to follow her on Facebook.
Yeah, say that you came from the podcast, and I'll accept your friend request. And I post a lot of articles, also like my personal thoughts, as well as like poetry that I have written. I also have a website that is laurenmedinacreative.com. If you want to read some of the poetry that I've written, you're welcome to check that out as well.
All right, great. Well, that is it for today's episode. Thank you to those that listened and watched. Thank you again, Lauren, for being a guest on today's episode. This conversation was beautiful, just like the first conversation that we had a while ago. Now, to those who are probably new, this is probably your first episode of you listening to Kintsugi Talks. You can continue to listen on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Those are all the places where you can listen to that for now. I'm trying to expand that in the near future. And if you're watching this on YouTube for the first time, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so that you'll be notified every time I post a video of an interview that I have done. And until then, God bless. Thank you for staying tuned to this episode and staying till the end of episode 25, Sitting and Suffering with my wonderful guest, Lauren Medina. Now, this is actually going to be the last episode of season 1 of Kintsugi Talks, but don't worry, there's going to be a season 2 coming with a lot more new content, and I will have the first episode of season 2 be a breakdown of why there was such a long amount of time between this episode and the episode before, and just some new life updates for you guys. To those that have been patient enough with me and have still decided to be a listener of my podcast, a subscriber of the YouTube, a follower on Instagram, thank you very much. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. For those who have reached out to me in my absence just to check in with me to see how I'm doing, I again appreciate it, and I thank you all so much, and I love you all dearly. Now, make sure to follow the Kintsugi Talks podcast on Instagram. The link for that will be down below so that you can stay tuned to when season 2 will drop and when the first episode of season 2 will drop. The link for that would be down below. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the Continue Talks podcast YouTube, because of course there will be a video uploaded to that of the first episode of season 2. And again, thank you guys so much for being as supportive as you have been. So until then, God bless.